You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Sound Transit has a busy few years ahead. Trains are set to start running to Federal Way in December. A long-awaited East Side expansion across Lake Washington will be a little delayed again, and that's to at least April 2026. That comes as riders and public transit enthusiasts alike are clamoring for additional light rail services to Ballard, West Seattle, and beyond. And we're expecting an influx of riders for the World Cup and other big events coming to Seattle in the next few years. Amid all of this, Sound Transit has a new CEO, former King County Executive Dow Constantine, and he's here with me in studio. Haven't seen you for a minute, Dow. It's good to have you back in studio. Good to see you.
It's great to be back here at KUOW, Libby.
Yeah, you're feeling good. I know you're
I feel
old
right
radio
at home.
hand,
Yeah.
so... I ride the train every single day. I come in from Shoreline, so the Linwood extension has been my daily commute since it opened about a year ago. It's been packed in recent weeks because of all the I-5 construction, so people are taking advantage of the trains. Just anecdotally, do you see any updated rider information, or are you seeing that people are using it a lot more this summer?
Yes, we are seeing ridership records regularly, 150,000 people a day, 3 million people a month for each of the last 3 months. I mean, that predates the Revive I-5 work. Folks are moving to transit just like you, because we're extending it out, making it available to more communities, and that is making it more useful to a much bigger part of the Puget Sound population. It's very exciting. It's great to see this thing that was once just an idea we had playing a really important role in people's lives.
For you, I mean, you're coming off of being the King County executive. You stepped down earlier this year. You've been the Sound Transit CEO for a few months now. What has surprised you so far about your transition into this role? Because, of course, you're on the board for years. You know Sound Transit. You know the issues it's facing. You knew the challenge you were taking on when you took over the CEO role. Has anything surprised you so far?
I mean, there are little surprises everywhere, and there's always an unpleasant surprise. Something will go wrong, and suddenly you're in a 4 a.m. meeting trying to solve it. That's a little bit different than the county executive job. There were more support staff around to help with those sorts of things. But I think the thing that has impressed me the most is exactly what you were talking about, the enthusiasm that the people have for this relatively new service in our region. I hear from people on a daily basis about how much they enjoy and appreciate and use the system. And yes, they obviously have things that they can complain about, and we're working hard to fix those as we are able. But the fact is that more than 80% of people in the Sound Transit taxing district, not riders, the people who are paying the taxes, strongly support light rail, and the only thing they want is more of it and faster.
Is there anything that is occupying the most of your time right now? Any of the projects or any, revamps at Sound Transit? I know you're looking at cost and things like that. What takes up most of your time these days?
I mean, obviously, you've already touched on some of the headline items, which is getting Federal Way and Eastlink open, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. That is a daily task, making sure that we're pushing those forward, opening as soon as possible while maintaining safety and reliability, but also working on the long-term financial plan. So making sure that we are able to build out this entire system, and not just that, operate it in a way that is efficient and sustainable over the course of decades. And so that is work we're doing over the next 6 months, really rejiggering the numbers, working through all of our assumptions and ultimately bringing to the board a plan that will put us on a smooth trajectory out into the future.
And that has to do with like global fiscal situations like tariffs, all kinds of things. We're going to talk about that in just a minute when we get into more of like the ST3 expansion projects. First up, the next 3 stations that are going to open, these Federal Way stations, that's at Highline College in Des Moines, Star Lake between Kent and Federal Way, and South 320th Street in downtown Federal Way. Anything people should know about this? Why did it get moved up? Because I think this was expected early next year.
Well, we're building both of these extensions as quickly as we can, and Federal Way was just coming along really quickly. And I talked to the board members, and they did not want to wait a moment after it was ready to go to open it up for the public. So we decided to move it up. It will open very soon. We haven't announced an official date yet, but I'm pretty sure it'll be before the end of the year. And then we're going to be moving on to the East Link, and we can talk about that as well. I will tell you, Federal Way is going to be an enormous boon for South King County and for North Pierce County. People will be able to take a bus or drive or be dropped off and get to their destination, whether it's the airport or downtown Seattle or now very soon the East Side, in an absolutely predictable amount of time, not having to sit in traffic, being able to do their work or other activities rather than having to sit in a traffic jam on I-5. It is liberating for people, and it will allow folks to access that less expensive housing in South King County while having a real opportunity to reach the economic and educational resources throughout the region.
Let's talk about the East Link I-90 extension. You know, that service, when it was way first approved, was supposed to open in 2020. It turns out being, putting the first light rail train across a floating bridge. It's complicated stuff. There's been a number of engineering challenges, a number of delays associated with whether it's the concrete plinths or the nylon inserts. Now it looks like early 2026, maybe spring of next year. What are you telling people who are frustrated, who see this thing just going off, the calendar dates getting pushed back?
Yeah. There were not a ton of challenges that caused all this delay other than the construction challenges for the contractor in building the plinths. And this is a unique structure and it's unique engineering. So they managed to correct that. It took them some time, which is understandable because this is, a lot of components.
These were like 5,000 plus hand-poured plinths.
Yeah.
Like this is not an overnight thing.
And I've gone out and walked the bridge and seen every one of them. So it's...
Do you jump up and down on them to make sure that you're not going to...
But, the scale of it, you don't really notice it when you're driving across the bridge. The scale of it is remarkable. But we are very quickly closing in on being able to go to live wire testing on the bridge. And that really is going to help us narrow the window for when we're going to be able to open it. You mentioned the April date. There was an April date announced in a filing for the federal government because we need to give them kind of an outside date for our financing. But I'm quite confident that we're going to do a lot better than that. We're mostly done with the construction on the bridge. Folks are very positive about the progress we're making, but we won't know until we get those lines lit up and get the trains out there running across the bridge what other adjustments we need to make before we can open.
What about those flexible rail ties? Because those are kind of the next question mark, right? That's where the actual floating bridge connects to the land part. What do we know about those and the testing of those?
It's fascinating engineering. So we've and these have all been tested in the real world. We went and built an entire test track out in the desert to test these trains and the newly engineered tracks that allow the bridge to rise and fall or sway side to side and for the entire system to expand and contract and be able to operate properly.
Because the level of the lake will change and there's going to be weather and things.
It can rise and fall. It can sway side to side. And the rails as well will expand and contract based on the heat, the temperature. And so it accounts for all of that. It's going to be, when it opens, I think, a globally recognized engineering marvel. And it will be the first light rail of its kind across a floating bridge. It may be the last because we may not do it again. But the fact is, in the distant future, there may also be rail across 520. The problem with Lake Washington is it's very, very deep. It's too wide to span with a single span, touching only on the land, and it's too deep to put pilings in, which is why you have floating bridges. So if you want to get rail to the east side, you pretty much have to put it on the floating bridge.
I'm sure you never want to hear the word plinth again, but I'm going to ask another question about that. The Seattle Times has extensive reporting about communication and kind of a tension between Sound Transit and the contractor that poured those plinths that's responsible for the project, the East Side Rail extension across Lake Washington. And it looks like there is going to be a question about who's on the hook for the cost overruns because you had to have those plinths repoured. because of the nylon inserts being replaced. Mike Lindblom is saying, looking at the internal documents he's got a hold of, maybe $250 million plus of cost overruns. What is going to happen if the contractor says we won't pay?
We are in constant conversations with the contractor, and we're working to narrow the disagreements. And at the end, we will probably not be able to completely agree on who owes whom what, because, of course, Sound Transit has costs from this delay as well. And that will be resolved through some sort of process. But this is common.
I'm sure you don't want to say, but likely litigation is the reporting out there.
You can have litigation, you can have arbitration, you can have mediation. There are all sorts of different dispute resolution processes. Every big construction project has these kinds of details to finish up at the end. I worked on a lot of them at King County. We never had one where people weren't in disagreement at the end about who owed what to whom, and this will get resolved. I'm very confident that they are going to be able to deliver the project to us here, hand us the keys, as it were, and we'll be able to get service going across the bridge. We can sort out the details afterward.
Have there been any lessons from the running from downtown Redmond to South Bellevue so far? I mean, the copper wire theft, is that still an issue? Like any other lessons?
So I don't really appreciate being woken up at 3 a.m. to be told that someone's stolen our copper wire. So
that was a rough one.
Yeah, a couple times I was out there in the middle of the night trying to figure out how we can get these guys. So we have deployed cameras, including a whole bunch of cameras that pan and tilt and zoom up and down the corridors, particularly in areas that might be most subject to theft. And those all feed into our security operations center now. And we've been able to interrupt some people who let themselves onto the tracks in the middle of the night. It is a much more secure situation. Our capital team is engineering ways to retrofit some of that equipment to make it harder to steal. And for our future design, a lot of that design is going to be done with securing those materials in mind. It is a problem around the world. This is not a Sound Transit problem. It's a global problem. Copper prices are allowing people to think they can help themselves and make a profit, and we're just not going to put up with it.
Luckily, our air conditioning is back on, but we have copper wire theft that took out our air conditioning at the KUOW
goodness.
building not too long ago.
I am so sorry.
That we are very well aware of copper wire theft issues. Let's move on to the ST3 expansion, including Everett, West Seattle, Ballard, down to Tacoma. First off, I know a lot of people are looking at timelines and wondering, what is that looking like? Can you do kind of a big picture flyover for us about where we're at with the next phase of the really big expansion?
Yeah. So the next phases are launching into West Seattle, which will connect SoDo, and which is important for a lot of the rest of the system, and then to West Seattle and Ballard. And that's important because that would involve the construction of a second tunnel through downtown Seattle, adding capacity, and then connecting South Lake Union, Seattle Center, and out to Ballard. Everett and Tacoma are right on the heels of that. We've been doing a lot of work right now on Tacoma. The board has green-lighted progress on Tacoma. We've settled on station locations, and we're working really hard with our stakeholders up and down the line on making sure that we're having the least impact possible on communities as we build this. Everett is fascinating because it's going to be a very long reach to get to Everett, but there are a number of station locations that, like Linwood, are going to be big draws for working people who need to get to more reliable transportation to get to work. So at Ashway, at Mariner, and in downtown Everett, as well as the area of Payne Field and the Boeing plant. We're going to have stations that are big draws for a very quickly growing population in Snohomish County.
Is Payne Field going to be in the system?
So there are a number of proposed station locations. Some of them are closer to or further from Payne Field because there's a tension between having the one right at the airport and having one that is more accessible to job centers like Boeing. We're going to be working with the board chair, Dave Summers, who's the Snohomish County executive, as well as the other board members from Snohomish County, on finding the right combination of stations that will best serve the Snohomish County of the future. What I know is when we put together Sound Transit 3, When I was board chair back in 2014, 2015, some people really questioned the wisdom of going all the way to Everett. It's so far. Do people really want to go to Everett? What I told them was...
Did people say, people want to go to Everett?
And I told them was, one, I'm an Everett kid. My mom and my grandparents and my great-grandparents were from Everett.
Really? My mom went to Everett High School.
Mine did, too.
Wow.
Oh,
okay,
I know.
See, Everett roots. We're defensive about Everett.
Yes. And second, all of our Puget Sound Regional Council predictions show that Everett and Snohomish County is the big growth opportunity of the future. That's where the jobs and the housing are most likely to go. So we want to get ahead of that and create these centers that will allow the people who live and work there to get around the region without the kind of burdens that the last generation had.
So when it comes to the federal picture, there was some reporting from The Urbanist that there was a $25 million grant. This was for Sound Transit's Graham Street infill station. That grant was at risk due to a federal review. A lot of uncertainty in the atmosphere right now when it comes to anything to do with the federal government. Is there a major impact from the Trump administration on Sound Transit right now, or could there be?
There's potentially some impact. Sound Transit, fortunately, and not really by design, is less exposed right now. We have fewer federal grant applications. There's less money in the pipeline just because of the ebb and flow of our work. But there's still, significant funds like those you mentioned. We will continue to work diligently and dispassionately with the folks running the Federal Department of Transportation, as well as the local representatives, to make sure we make the case for funding our important infrastructure. And I think that we have a really good case to make. One of the bigger challenges is making sure that as the next budget is put together, transit broadly continues to be funded. And so we're, advocating with our members of Congress as well as the administration to try to make sure that happens.
We got a lot of listener questions when we put out the call to KUOW audience members that you were going to come in and talk about Sound Transit. And some of that was focused on the ST3 expansion. So first up, Kristen, who is texting from Ballard. Kristen asked, are there any updates on the Ballard extension line? And are there any plans to speed up that opening date? We're getting frustrated out here, says Kristen. You've mentioned kind of what the picture of that will be. Can you tell Kristen anything? I mean, Sound Transit has said it's going to be 2039. What's the picture for Ballard?
So this is part of the work we're going to be doing over the next 6 months, identifying where we can get smarter, more clever with the way in which we're building things. Our capital team has come up with what they call opportunities. There are opportunity registers for each of these extensions. And without going into detail, I will tell you that they contain a lot of really exciting ideas, things that you would do anyway, even if they didn't save money or didn't save time, but they just make things work better. They have fewer construction impacts. We are in no position right now to say that we can build Ballard sooner, although everyone is always focused on that as a goal, building Everett sooner, building Tacoma sooner. Of course, I'd like to see West Seattle sooner every time I'm sitting on that bridge in traffic. But when we get to about the end of the first quarter next year, we will have brought together all of these different costs and revenues under something called our enterprise plan or enterprise approach. And that is the sort of holistic look at the next couple of decades at Sound Transit to allow the board to make choices about what they would adjust, tinker with in order that we might have not just a balanced plan, but be able to do things like deliver better or sooner.
So a fellow West Seattleite, Matthew, wrote in, we know Ballard and West Seattle are in the works and are needed infrastructure. However, the increasing costs are getting a lot of pushbacks, environmental impacts, removal of housing and small businesses in West Seattle. Will these lines be built? I believe the answer is probably going to be yes from the Sound Transit CEO, Matthew. Matthew wants to know if these are going to be thoughtfully and honestly tackled problems, and will communities be listened to? What's your answer to that, Dow?
Well, the answer is yes. Yes, they're going to be built, and yes, communities are going to be listened to. Some of these opportunities that I just talked about reduce some of these construction impacts. We look at the places where doing the obvious thing also has negative impacts and try to figure out, is there a smarter way, a different way to do this? We can't avoid all impacts. We're trying to create a transit system in a very built-out area, a transit system that should have been built 50 or 60 years ago. But the fact is that as long as I'm in charge, we are going to be very focused on avoiding negative impacts wherever we are able, while delivering the system that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to need.
Is displacement inevitable for some of these projects?
There's always going to be some displacement because, again, we're very built out. Certainly in Seattle, but not just in Seattle neighborhoods. In Snohomish County, even south of Payne Field, there are many, many, many folks with businesses, with affordable housing, and we're trying to thread our way through there without impacting anyone is very, very difficult. But we are listening carefully, and you have a board. Here you have a board that's made up of elected officials from these jurisdictions. They are very attuned to the concerns of their constituents, and I work with them on a daily basis to try to figure out ways to avoid those negative impacts.
So West Seattle expansion, the Sound Transit expansion, it's getting more expensive. When you look at that balance sheet, is there a potential that you might have to narrow the scope of what Sound Transit 3 looks like, the number of projects, the kinds of things you can do going forward because of the costs? We've gone through several of these kind of exercises where we had to reduce or postpone over the course of decades because, the economy changes. You really can't predict what's going to happen in 20 years. But the fact is that the way we're approaching it this time is to simply try to be smarter about it, to look at each of the projects, each of the stations, each of the extensions, and find ways that we can build it less expensively, smarter, maybe faster, with fewer construction impacts. Going through that exercise with every inch of West Seattle and Ballard and Everett and Tacoma is going to yield real savings. And so I think that ultimately we're going to be able to bring this in for a landing and deliver the value that the people voted for, maybe slightly in a slightly different way than we had imagined 10 years ago. But it is a lot more difficult and more detailed work, but ultimately it will provide much greater value than the approaches we took before where we just delayed or reduced what we're delivering. So taxpayers, or voters that is, approved a tax hike in 2016 added to that sales tax in order to get a certain slate of projects. Do you foresee going back to the voters for additional revenue for these projects that are on the to-do list?
That would be a last resort. Our goal is to, again, over the course of these 6 or 9 months, to put together a proposal that uses our currently established stream of revenue that goes off into the future, manages that to the best advantage, reduces the cost of construction, identifies what we can do about future operating costs, and starts to drive that curve down. Because think about this. As you're building this thing out, capital costs start to go down, but the operating cost goes up and up and up because you're just adding more miles and more passengers and more stations. You have to figure out how to bend that curve in order to sort of recapture the funds to balance the budget, notwithstanding the COVID inflation, the tariffs, and more.
It's a lot of challenges. I'm talking with Sound Transit CEO Dow Constantine. A few more listener questions for you, Dow. And safety is a number one concern that a lot of folks write in about. Martel writes in that they have not ridden Sound Transit in a couple of years because they thought the homelessness and drug issue that they saw on the train was a safety issue. I will say, having ridden the train pretty consistently over the past 3-4 years since I moved back to Seattle, that the safety issues I have felt have gotten better in recent years. And that's just an anecdotal report from Martel, who hasn't ridden in a couple of years. But I also want to have you respond at the same time to Jason, who says, how do you make transit centers cleaner and safer while still helping people who are chronically homeless, have mental health issues, and are using drugs in these areas, in the restroom, et cetera?
So, this is your observation actually goes directly to one of the main points I want to make, which is the more people who are on transit, the safer it is. That is not just an anecdotal observation. That is statistically supported across the country. And there are more people on transit now. Now, you remember during the COVID pandemic, there were very few people on the sidewalks, on the streets, and a very large percentage of them were folks who were struggling, right? The same, you cannot separate transit from the communities in which transit operates. So if that is a challenge that's happening on the streets, it's probably going to be happening to one extent or another on buses and trains and in stations. If a lot of folks are out there using the transit system, it becomes very, very safe. And I think that we have had a real strong positive trend in safety. Is one of my main priorities is the customer experience, cleanliness, safety, or security, and I'm really emphasizing that with our staff. But the main way to do that is to just have a lot of folks using transit. We are, constantly faced with the challenge of how we police on the transit system. We have a police force at Sound Transit is made up of King County sheriffs, deputies, and detectives. We then have hundreds, like over 500 private security who you see on the platforms and on the trains. And we have those fare ambassadors who engage folks and really ask them to sign up for an ORCA card or help them navigate to the fare machines. Metro Transit has now started checking fares on board again after COVID. All of this is moving toward a system where there's a different set of expectations, where there's a higher set of expectations that we're all going to be bound to observe. And that is the emphasis I'm trying to bring to this, to our staff and to our board members. We're leaving behind the sort of COVID era situation, and we're moving toward an era where we have standards for conduct on transit that we will expect people to adhere to, and if they can't adhere to them, they will enforce them.
Here's a question from Peter in Tacoma. It has to do with fare payment. Peter says you can travel through Europe using your smartphone to pay for transit rides. You can also do this in some other parts of the country. I know I was paying with a regular credit card when I visited Chicago recently on the L. You can just, tap your credit card. Sound Transit doesn't let you use your phone or your credit card. Having effective technology, Peter says, increases confidence in the system and encourages increased usage. What do you think about that? And is there a push to maybe make it easier or different to pay?
Well, first, putting the headline up front, I think we'll be there by the end of the year. We're in this ORCA system, which involves many, many agencies. And so when we make a technology change, we have to work with all the agencies and have everyone kind of be synced up. But we should have that. We've been working on that. And I am assured by our staff that we are headed toward a year-end success story for being able to pay, as I do for everything else, with my phone.
So tap your phone and go. Is that a little breaking news? I haven't seen that anywhere.
It's just we've just been plugging away at it.
All right.
But you've got King County Metro, Community Transit up in Snohomish County. You've got Pierce Transit, multiple agencies working together on this unified fare system. And the fact is that when you can't just go off on your own and do something, it takes longer.
Yeah. So last listener question, we received a comment from Fred in West Seattle. And, we're going to paraphrase Fred because he didn't use as nice a language, but he's basically saying that he sees Sound Transit cost overruns, construction delays as a sign of chaos. And he says he doesn't have confidence that you are going to change anything because you have tenure with the board. You've been in leadership in the county for a long time. Fred thinks that, this is going to be more of the status quo leadership from you when you are in charge of Sound Transit. What do you say to Fred or somebody like him who, again, like frustration, Fred was big mad about thinking that things are going to be more of the same?
Yeah, well, I'll respectfully disagree with Fred. The difference is I have the relationships and the history here to be able to redirect the operations, the construction, and work with the political leaders around the region to bring us to consensus around new directions.
So you're saying experience is a benefit?
It actually helps.
Yeah.
When someone comes in from outside, they don't know anyone, they don't have the relationships, they don't have the history with folks. It is a lot harder for them to actually muster the coalition they need to move things forward or to change direction. I've been doing that for decades, and doing this new role is going to be, I think, a real opportunity.
I know it's been months since you were in elected office, so you're completely out of the political sphere, and talk of politics is probably just not in. You have to really knock off the old cobwebs for this. But I did want to ask you really quickly before we go about the King County executive race. This is a role that you held since 2009. There was a primary last week. We saw two clear frontrunners who will face each other in November. That's Claudia Balducci and Gurmai Zahalai. The Stranger has said they're pretty politically aligned. Anecdotally, I heard from voters who said, we can't really tell them apart on a lot of their votes. I've observed Gurmai's really running on a compelling life story, his work bringing crisis care centers to the county. Claudia is running on her experience with Sound Transit partially, also bringing housing to the county, more experience in elected office Claudia has. Do either of those candidates get your endorsement? Do you plan to endorse in the race? What are your thoughts?
I have happily been able to give up endorsing candidates, having taken on this new role. And I have to say that primary election night was really the first time that I fully appreciated how my life has changed. After 30 years of running for office, of all those election nights in suspense, just helpless, waiting for the polls to close and the votes to come in, I just didn't have to worry about it. And it was a real nice feeling. We have two excellent candidates. They're both friends. They're both good people. All of their accomplishments are real, and also they all sponsored legislation that started in my office. So,
if whoever's elected, if they call you up, they want advice on something, what's your best piece of advice for the next King County executive? And obviously, acting executive Shannon Braddock, I'm sure you worked with her for years as well.
She's super, yeah.
What any advice for the next executive?
The most important thing in any CEO role is to hire well, and what you want to do is to hire so well that you don't have to be there every minute, and you can have confidence that things are going to work just as well. And so if you call it making yourself redundant, whatever you want to call it, that is the key. So don't just hire your buddies. You got to go out and find the people who are going to be able to be you and exercise the same judgment and follow the same values, and then you will be successful.
Final question for you before we go. Do you have any train etiquette bugaboos? Anything that you wish people would know?
Seattleites still aren't very good about standing aside and letting people out of the train.
Yes.
I know, right?
Yes, it's true. Or moving when it's a crowded train. And these trains have been
getting
crowded.
Away from the doors. Yeah.
Getting away from the doors.
Yeah.
People just stand and block the center of the train. You could move more people in.
Yeah.
Boy, preaching to the choir here, for sure.
It's a challenge, but we're all going to learn together, aren't we?
That's a great positive way to end this conversation. Dow Constantine, CEO of Sound Transit, really appreciate you coming in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Libby.
Oh, and really quick before we go, for Peter in Tacoma who wrote in to ask about using your phone to pay for transit, if you have an Android phone, you can use Google Pay right now for the train. And as Dow Constantine said, more to come on that payment issue maybe soon. Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.